Okay, and with that, we are live for episode 146 of Trek Live. How was your Halloween, Dan?
It was really good. Pretty low key. That's how everything is mostly these days. But it was good. Yeah. How was yours?
Low key, lots of Star Trek. Didn't
Yeah.
do anything. Anybody who saw me at all on Twitter last night or is in our Discord server knows that I watched a lot of episodes of TNG. Yeah, it was a lot. It was a heavy TNG day.
Yeah.
But I got some horror episodes in there, which is kind of cool. I knew there were some coming, so I kind of wanted to power through and get to them just so I could say I watched some horror episodes on actual Halloween. But we're going to talk this week about Star Trek character conflict. We're going to look at how each show kind of uses character conflict to kind of define itself. I think one of the things that kind of differentiates these different series of Star Trek is perhaps maybe that, like the way that the characters interact with each other. Like that might be one of the things that gives each show its unique voice and personality. So we're gonna look at each show and talk about things that kind of come to mind when we think about this. And it's not super planned, not super scripted, as our stuff never is. It's just kind of a jumping off point and see where it goes. We're talking about it this week because, there's nothing that brings out conflict in people on the American calendar at all, like in the next few days, right? Like nothing at all. No reason to talk about conflict.
Wide open, yeah.
Yeah, nothing planned about this at all, as far as like scheduling the topic, of course.
Yeah.
But really looking forward to talking about it. We've had it kind of on our short list, or our long list, I guess, for a long time, maybe a couple of years even. We've kind of talked about doing it in a couple different ways, and we still might expand on it down the road a little bit, but I'm eager to get into it. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my rewatch recap, but first you. I'm eager to hear where you are on Deep Space Nine.
Mine is less impressive. I have only watched one episode. I need to get better at that. I think it was Whispers.
Ooh, I like Whispers.
Deep Space Nine episode, where O'Brien, something's up with the station. There's peace talks with some other players involved. It's a good kind of a conspiracy-ish type of episode.
Yeah.
It is the only problem with it. I'm not big on a Voyager episode like this.
Sure.
So I like this a little bit better, just because I don't know. I just like it a little bit better than
Course Oblivion.
These Course Oblivion and other episodes like this. But I like it.
Yeah, I think Whispers is really unique for its twist. Kind of similar. I mean, of course, Oblivion comes later and does it even bigger and goes even more ambitious with it. But I remember, like early on, seeing Whispers for the first time, or maybe before I totally knew what it was, and being surprised that we've done those kinds of stories in Star Trek so many times. Where think of episodes like Remember Me, which I just watched last week, where the universe is kind of screwed up and the perspective of the characters thrown off, and maybe they're in a parallel universe. Parallels from TNG kind of does a similar thing. And the twist of this episode, of course, is that it's not R. O'Brien that we're following. We're following a different, a cloned version. And he doesn't know that he's a clone. He thinks he's the real guy, and the way everybody else is reacting to him is due to them knowing that he's probably not who he thinks he is. I just find it kind of creative and innovative and outside the box and with a cool twist. I think Colm Meaney's really good in it. I think it's a solid early episode of DS9 for me.
Yeah. I like the rest of the cast too. I think they do a good job of really trying to be their actors too, and they kind of it's nice to be able to see that kind of get there, not just on O'Brien, but
agreed. Yeah, for sure. We have a few people in the room. We have AKA Mamel, who is here all the time these days, and we appreciate your support.
Yeah.
We have Rob. Good to see you, Rob. Fitzcal Herb.
Good to see you, Rob.
Yep. AKA Mamel likes Whispers, says it's a good episode. for me, I did, like I said, right at the outset, I put a big dent in TNG Season 4. I started this weekend with Legacy, and finished up with the Nth Degree last night, which is the Barclay networking into the Enterprise computer episode, which I really like, actually. But Season 4 of TNG is really consistent, I think. A lot of really good episodes in this run. I really, really love The Wounded. I really love, which is the Cardassian Chief O'Brien episode. Captain Maxwell, who's kind of gone rogue and attacking Cardassian ships who he thinks are, up to no good and violating their peace treaty. First Contact is absolutely one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek. Seeing an actual First Contact, take place. The sort of duck blind version of the mission gone wrong, and seeing really from the perspective of the alien society who's being contacted, and seeing the sort of mixed feelings on that planet about what this change is going to bring. And I just think it takes a really realistic and credible approach to, not everybody's going to welcome something like Starfleet or the Federation with open arms and say, yes, we're ready for this. Not everybody's ready for the change that comes with entering that galactic community, I guess. So Data's Day, I really like that. Reunions.
There's a pretty solid run.
Yeah, there was really not many that I wasn't as hot on. On Twitter, I watched Devil's Due, and I said that in my mind, I thought it was kind of divisive. In my growing up, being around that episode, I feel like some people really like it, some people are less fans of it, and I got some pushback for that. Some people were like, "What are you talking about, divisive? This is a great episode," which is why I like to pose questions like that, because it challenges my preconceptions, and maybe what I thought was true 10, 15 years ago isn't as true anymore, and more people have come around on that one. There are more fans of it out there than I thought. So Devil's Due, The Loss is a tough one for me. Deanna losing her empathic abilities, and creating some character conflict among the crew, which is few and far between on TNG, which we're going to talk about. But yeah, really, really liking it. The horror episodes I saw were Night Terrors, which I think I've talked about before on the show, maybe when each of us has kind of hit it in these rewatch recaps. Probably my least favorite episode of the bunch, but I was glad to watch it on Halloween because there is some creepy stuff in it.
Yeah.
But Deanna on the obvious rigs going up into the green screen. Where are you? Eyes in the dark. That stuff's pretty tough. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that. But Identity Crisis is one that we've watched on Trek After Dark before. Another kind of horror-y, suspenseful, weird episode.
I like that a little bit better, though.
Me too. I like that a lot. I'm actually a pretty decent fan of that. There's some cool mystery to it. There's some real suspense to, Geordi kind of knowing what's coming for him. Watching his friend go through it and kind of seeing the signs that it's coming, and it being like a race against time to try to figure it out. I love the scene on the holodeck trying to recreate the shadows and figure out, who was there in that old recording of a log. I like Identity Crisis a lot. So it was a good run, good day of watching Star Trek on a kind of, mellow Halloween, socially distanced and, quarantined version of the holiday. A.K.A. Mamel says she watched Genesis last night, which is another great Halloween sort of outing, horror show. So I think that'll do it for the rewatch recap. I don't want to go. We could do the whole hour on Whispers and this batch of TNG episodes, but that is not our mission this week. So we're going to talk about, like I said, Star Trek character conflict, look at how each show kind of used character conflict with its regular cast and its characters to their own strengths and weaknesses, I guess. So when we started talking about this topic, Dan, what kind of comes to mind? Maybe before we do you have any opening thoughts or sort of general takeaways?
Opening thoughts? Yeah, I think each show handles it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And each show maybe won't finished with the same. Like it can change how they handle conflict with characters and within that given show. So I think there's some good stuff to kind of talk about and kind of work through, because, like I said, each show I think is a little bit different how it handles it, but also it also doesn't change, so it changes throughout the show. Should be interesting to talk about, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely something that we should kind of keep in mind as we maybe work through each show. Like, did these things shift, or did they adjust course on the way that they handled some of the character conflicts that were maybe set up from the beginning? What was paid off? What stayed true to form throughout the show? What didn't? And was it an asset to the show or not? To do whatever they did, whatever they chose to do. Because each show really does have sort of a different take on how to use the characters and how to present conflict between the dynamic of the sort of crew of the week or of the series. So with I guess maybe start with TOS, which is the granddaddy, the initial show. For my money, I think conflict between the characters is kind of like the identity of that show. I think the sort of the tug and pull of those three characters. It's not always conflict, but it's these three characters at the top of the call sheet: Kirk, Spock, McCoy. Having different ways of viewing sort of the challenge of the week and the antagonist of the week, and the obvious. It's been beaten to death. Everybody knows. I think if you know and love TOS, Spock is the unemotional logic approach to solving problems. McCoy is the humanist, emotional, compassionate,
angel or demon,
approach, and Kirk kind of being at the top of the pyramid, having to take both approaches and meld them together to figure out the best way forward. Through that, I think there's natural conflict that is constantly, at hand between Spock and McCoy, especially, because they have different, perspectives on life and different worldviews. So, I mean.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think there are definitely some, outside conflict, but it really does stem from that between the characters and how they deal with that conflict. So it's almost like, I'm trying to not get bogged down in terms, but, the secondary conflict is always, the alien of the week or the problem of the week, but I think the conflict really is between that trio and kind of the rest of the crew and how they handle that. So,
Yeah, I think, when I think of TOS and the way it uses character conflict, I immediately think of episodes like Tholian Web, which intentionally kind of pulls Kirk out of the dynamic, puts them in a crisis situation, and forces Spock and McCoy to kind of work through it together without that bridge in the middle to kind of meld both sides and, find the strength in each argument to kind of use. That to me is sort of like the show boiling down to its most core essentials and exploring what the show, because I think TOS of all the shows might be the easiest to boil down in terms of what is the show about? What is it actually exploring beyond the Star Trek stuff? What is the mission of the show? And I think because it's the first show and it's not concerned with, it was a science fiction adventure show in the 60s. It's not thinking about building this world and taking advantage of this, centuries long continuity of Star Trek franchise stuff. It's just its own thing, and I think what it's interested in exploring is those different philosophies and worldviews and how they work together, and how to use differing opinion and infinite diversity to work through things, as opposed to just blowing it up and not talking to each other, which is why the show's so timeless. I think that's why people might latch onto it kind of across time, and there are things that are universal about the way that show is built. So because of that, I think it's the easiest one to talk about because it's so inherent to the show's DNA. For me, that's what I think about when I'm watching TOS, speaking for myself. But I think even the sub-characters, I think Scotty is constantly, he's kind of his own thing. He's a sub-character, he's a supporting role. He's not always super involved, but he has his own perspective, and he fights with Spock, and he doesn't always agree with the sort of status quo or the decision made at the top. So I think TOS really leans into that character conflict piece of its foundation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we can both agree that TOS is more of like an internal kind of character kind of conflict.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. I think, the conflict of the week in terms of like who's the adversary now is certainly like, these episodes are really easily defined by, this is the one with Trelane, this is the one with the Gorn Captain, this is the one with the Mirror Universe or the Planet Killer. Like, there's always like an antagonist that has to be dealt with. But, I do think the show usually does a pretty good job of building that antagonist and creating an interesting character. I think it because of its smaller cast and it's really just about these three people most of the time, the sort of guest of the week is easier to kind of integrate into the dynamic and build a thick, interesting, rich character to play off of. But I think it's all designed to explore our people. I do think most of the time the focus at the end of the day is really a mirror on humanity through the eyes of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and how they throw together all their different ideas and backgrounds and philosophies to work through the challenge. Are there episodes that come to mind for you when you think about TOS and the character conflicts and the way Spock and McCoy kind of are at odds dealing with a problem? Like, is there anything that kind of not to put you on the spot?
Maybe like, man, there's so many.
I'm trying to think myself because I didn't think of asking this, like to name. I'm not going to put you on the spot for every single show. If one comes to mind, but like I'm thinking about because it's so to the core of this show. Like if you wanted to illustrate to somebody that you were trying to explain, like this is what Star Trek TOS is. Like if we were trying to sell this theory about, this is what the show is at its core foundation. Like, what would you show somebody to kind of sell them on that idea? Like, is there an episode that really illustrates it?
I hate that I'm going to say this, but I feel like we talk about it every other episode. But we could do City on the Edge, right? There is this problem, but I think the conflict, you can see conflict in between the three characters that's going on. What's happening with the conflict of the week? Again, like you said, the mirroring. We're looking at how they want to handle it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Edith Keeler and her fate and the way that the different characters sort of have to deal with swallowing that information and staying true to the mission and allowing it to happen. And like, I do think the different characters' perspectives and their strengths and weaknesses definitely come to the forefront watching them.
Because, Kirk and probably the Doctor probably want to like save her, but it's the conflict of, probably, they definitely want to save her, but, the logic dictates that, we gotta let it play out.
Sure.
I think creates conflict too.
Another one that kind of removes Kirk from the equation a little bit that I know, some people are really fond of this episode. I like it a lot. I'm not as huge on it as some others. Is the Galileo 7. You have Spock kind of on his first sort of away mission command.
Mission,
Yeah, where he's with McCoy and he's rubbing up against him pretty aggressively in this one with the other members of the away team as well, or the landing party. But just the whole way of dealing with that kind of a crisis situation and like the simple things with like, you lose one member of the landing party and, the crew kind of wants to give that person the dignity of a burial and a little service outside the shuttle to just keep being human, and Spock just isn't interested in doing that because they have this mission at hand to try to get the shuttle off the ground and they have these things they have to accomplish. There are episodes like that I think really do a nice job of exploring Spock's unique perspective and how it rubs against people like McCoy and some of the other members of that landing party. So, I think. Good. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they've got this delicate balance. You take one of those out, and then it just goes through straight chaos.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's something that the show does kind of come back to. I think the Tholian Web's the most obvious, like, intentional, like, yep, this is what we're doing. Kirk's gone, and we're going to see how these two people respond.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. But I think the most interesting thing about the way TOS is, with what we just talked about, is the way that these other shows kind of come later and try to take maybe a little bit of a different approach and are constantly, I think, kind of battling themselves a little bit with how much to embrace characters having conflict amongst each other, like especially the human characters. I think
we just move on to the.
Yeah, I think TNG is the obvious
TOS.
Next step forward.
Or TNG, yeah.
Yeah, Gene Roddenberry, I think, in the years between TOS and TNG, made a decision that he was less interested in exploring humanity having conflicts amongst itself, and having us
flip flop.
We flip flop, yeah. We kind
of for the first couple seasons, maybe.
For sure, yeah. I think it gets more gray as the show goes on, and they find ways to kind of push against the initial mission of the show. But I think in the early days of TNG, there's a definite, well-documented decision that Gene Roddenberry made that humanity by the 24th century has kind of moved beyond petty jealousies and small disagreements. We have arrived. It's the we have arrived phase where we don't have these different ways of thinking about things, and when they're in these command structures, they just do. They don't argue. They don't talk over each other. They don't butt heads. They kind of just go. And the conflict in especially early TNG has to arrive strictly through the outsider of the week, the antagonist of the week, whatever the challenge is, whether it's a holodeck malfunction or an alien or what, or an entity, whatever it might be, Q, whoever it is that week, that's where the conflict's going to come from. It's not going to come from, Data and Riker disagreeing about something the way McCoy and Spock did most of the time. And if it does, it's going to come because there is some sort of even external force influencing one of those characters. It's not going to be a natural.
So it's external conflict
still
affecting our crew.
Yes. Yeah. It's the only way in the early days of that show. I think we typically are going to get that. So, how do you feel? I mean, do you, as somebody who hasn't been watching these shows for over and over and over again for years, going back to when you were a kid, and you've seen them more than once, but not a dozen times. Like, do you find it jarring when you watch TNG? Like, do you find the lack of character conflict?
A little bit. It kind of depends on kind of my what show I just watched and where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But I can definitely see the glaring difference between TOS and then TNG. I prefer the just the other kind of way with the way TOS handled it. But not to say that it's a bad way. I like that we go in a different direction, and I think we ultimately change a little bit as the show develops. But I mean, I'm not against the outside. There are some times when it can get a little bit old, when it's like you said, the alien encounter of the week, the planet of the week, the things like that. So, yeah.
I think it just kind of depends on your perspective. I totally get, maybe because I have grown up with it, and they're both kind of so core to me as a person. Both these shows, as different as they are. I can see the appeal, like I've told you, and I've said it on this show, I think, a couple of times. If you put a phaser to my head and you say, what is your favorite TV show of all time, and you force me to name something, I'm probably going to say
favorite.
Favorite.
Yes.
Maybe not the best. My favorite is probably Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Okay.
And I can see, and if I'm being completely honest, part of the reason for that might be that because of the lack of characters fighting with each other and having arguments, it becomes this extreme warm blanket comfort food kind of TV. It's just comfortable. It's easy to watch. It doesn't generate stress and anxiety just watching these people be together. You're watching people who work well together, who are friends with each other, who respect each other's differences, but It's just not a thing. Conflict isn't a thing, and I think, who doesn't want to, work in an environment where you don't argue with your coworkers and you don't, disrespect your boss, or you're not disrespected by your boss or your coworkers. Like there's something inherently like that's what we want. That's where we want to get to. That does make it, alluring to me. But I can also see the other side of that, where some people get frustrated by, it's a little pad, it's a little safe, it's a little, unrealistic, it's a little too comfortable. So I see both sides of it. But I think because I grew up watching it, and I almost, even though I love TOS so much and I love it for its conflict, I love TNG for its lack of conflict too. I find it, just like last night watching those episodes, they just roll off. Like there's just no stress, there's no anxiety about it. It's the easiest thing in the world to watch, because I think of partially that lack of conflict among the characters. So I'm always interested to kind of think about that difference, and does it influence your preference? Like some people are, TOS all the way, some people are TNG all the way.
It definitely does, I think. Yeah. But for me, I can appreciate that. It is a preference for me to be maybe a little bit more character driven, but also I do really like these characters, and I think there is some good character development that we see throughout the show. But it's not just because I have a preference one way doesn't mean I dislike TNG.
Sure.
So.
And A.K. Mamel makes a good point, and I think right on an episode I just watched yesterday, Clues, which is like the mystery. They get knocked out, they wake up and they think it's 30 seconds, but it's actually a day, and Data's behind the whole thing. There's some character conflict there, and I think that's illustrative of, as the show goes on and they get into the middle seasons, I think they got more innovative with creating situations like in Clues, where, there are obvious outside influences kind of creating this situation where there is some conflict that, of course, gets resolved at the end of the episode. Nothing lingers into the next week, and TOS even doesn't do that. Everything kind of resets at the end of the episode because it's episodic and it's 90s or 60s TV and not 2020 TV. But I think they found ways more in the Michael Piller years of seasons 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 than maybe in seasons 1 and 2 to create these situations to allow for Data to be in conflict with Captain Picard, at least for those 45 minutes. It's still, I think, a little more safe and vanilla than some of the stuff you get in TOS, like in Bread and Circuses, where Spock and McCoy agree on nothing throughout the entire hour, pretty much. Like they just are philosophically opposed at the core principles of everything they're dealing with. But I think they did find ways through episodes like Clues and in like Future Imperfect, where Riker's kind of living in this parallel version of the future that's really a simulation, where he's not comfortable and is kind of rubbing up against the crew. Like you get to see the characters interact in these conflict-laden ways.
You get to see. Mm-hmm. You get to see character conflicts, but it's kind of week to week or moment to moment. It's not really on the forefront of the show, like you were saying with TOS. Yeah,
and it's typically generated by the crisis of the week. Like usually there's something weird going on that's creating, and sometimes it's like the character's possessed by something and they're acting abnormally. Sometimes it's it's a mystery caused by something, but they find ways to generate these situations, which largely work. Some of the really strong episodes come from that kind of situation, but they're not. I don't view them the same way that I view Spock and McCoy's inherent, disagreements on the way the world works and the way to deal with it problem. And I think episodes like, and she also mentioned Worf, obviously, and this is something that I think becomes common in all these other shows. I think the way that a lot of the best character conflict arrives in the rest of these shows, and even TOS, like this even applies to TOS. Like Spock is not purely human; he's half human. He's got human DNA in him. It's the outsider conflict. It's the character who isn't just a human guy or gal or whoever that has a different view. It's somebody that comes from a radically different background, and Worf obviously brings a different perspective to the table, coming from a different place. And that does create that's an opening for the show to allow for some degree of conflict. And I think in some of the other shows we're going to talk about as we move forward, that's where a lot of it comes from in these 90s era, especially shows. It comes from the outsider who's trying to integrate into, this structure of characters. In Reunion, Worf takes his badge off after K'Ehleyr gets killed and goes over to the Klingon ship and offs Duras against everything that he knows he should be doing, but he acts as a Klingon. He doesn't act as a Starfleet officer. So you do get moments like that, especially later in the show.
But again, that's that conflict can be set in motion by an external force.
Yes.
Like, I feel like we keep coming back to this, especially with TNG, that this is an externally. Usually.
I think Reunion, that one is a more primal, emotional decision that Worf makes. That's I think he loved K'Ehleyr, and he saw a future there someday. They were separated by circumstance, but he was obviously going back to the emissary very, very, I think he was into her. I think he wanted a future with her, and especially with Alexander. He's so married to Klingon tradition. He knows what tradition says that this dynamic should be, and I think he's kind of committed to trying to make that happen. And when she gets, murdered, he does what a Klingon guy would do, and that's an example of not necessarily like he's not possessed. There's no alien entity of the week that a cloud didn't go into his head and create a possessed version of Worf. That is character conflict. That's a decision that he made that was outside the bounds of what a Starfleet officer is supposed to do, and but he is also the outsider. He's a Klingon. He's not Commander Riker. He's not Geordi who throws down his badge and goes over and kills somebody. I think the show takes it needs a Klingon to kind of do that. Which is, but even TOS needed Spock. It was a Vulcan, so it's complicated. It's I think TOS. It's like again, it's more into the DNA of the show, and it's more week to week. I think it's more what the show's interested in exploring at its core. But TNG, I think, does do a nice job of finding ways to integrate it into its show. And I think, in my view, and not everybody's going to agree with this, it's an asset for the show, for me, that it's not baked in that these characters don't like each other or that there are suspicions about each other, or that's a huge asset. It's part of why I go back to it so much. Anything else on TNG that you want to touch on?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
We can kind of move into
what you're into right now. Fitzgerald kind of agrees, says TNG is his feel-good Trek when he needs it due to the lack of conflict and the teamwork, and I agree. Yeah, if that's what you're looking for, if you want that just comfortable, warm blanket Star Trek, it's TNG. For me, at least. I couldn't agree with that more. DS9 is what you're watching now, and is the show that... I mean, coming off of TNG, like I'm eager to hear your perspective since you're in the thick and thin of it. How do you see DS9 handling conflict different than what we kind of just talked about with TNG, which is what I'm watching currently?
It kind of, at least early on, like I'm still going through the earlier seasons, so I think it's kind of a mixed bag because I think you do get some really good character conflict.
Sure.
But it's also like situational conflict, I think, too, like where they are is definitely tough. So it's kind of a mixed bag, I think, at least from my perspective. I think just there's character conflict with I mean just every kind of character is it's kind of like bringing in these kind of misfits. It's a lot different than kind of TNG
for sure
is that aren't these atypical Starfleet officers, which there's not even, it's not just strictly Starfleet officers. We get Bajoran stuff. We get people on the Promenade,
Ferengi,
Quark.
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know. Am I way off basis in thinking that it's kind of a mixed bag, or do you think it's primarily external?
No, I think you're right. I think they still do. They clearly set out to make a show. I think coming off of TNG, where the ground rules lended itself to more character conflict, and I think the way they built the show is intentional to allow for that. I think by having like a third of the cast be non-Starfleet officers, you have Bajoran militia guys like Odo and Kira, and you have Quark, who's a Ferengian, completely outside anything, mixed with the Starfleet officers, even using the sort of ground rule of we really don't want Starfleet officers kind of constantly fighting with each other. We want the conflict to come from outside. The way they kind of got around it was by integrating more outsiders into the regular dynamic. It's not just 7 Starfleet officers that are kind of the made up of the main cast, the way that TNG kind of does. So I think the sort of mission for where most of the conflict is going to come from remains the same, but I think the show was built to allow for more of it by having characters like Kira and Odo and Quark constantly in contact with Sisko and Dax and O'Brien to put them in that position. But I do think one of the things you've talked about a good bit in these early episodes of TNG is kind of charting the O'Brien-Bashir relationship, and I think the way that relationship kind of gets built is not something that you would have seen in early TNG. Like building it from a place of these two guys just aren't kind of
don't like each other.
Yeah, like they just aren't necessarily a good mix. Yeah, like they are very different. I just don't think TNG was interested in exploring human relationships that way, where Deep Space Nine did. So I think it does take more chances. It's certainly more comfortable with character conflict than the Next Generation is. I think they made a choice because I think the writers, especially if you watch interviews and you read things, people who were writing on the show like Ron Moore were constantly trying to find ways to inject conflict into the show. They were interested in finding concepts that allowed for the characters to be in conflict, like we were talking about with the Next Generation, finding these situations to allow for it. Because if you're writing TV, you need that. Like it's hard to create interesting episodes over and over and over again when the characters can't disagree on anything. So Deep Space Nine, they needed it to be more of a place where they could have that, and that's the way they.
Yeah, I think with character conflict, especially, I think there's a sense of relatability. In our own lives, I think there is definitely conflict in our workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's also external things that can create conflict. So I think there is a certain
truth to
relatability to kind of that conflict with characters specifically. So,
yeah, I think that's 100% true. I think a lot of the conflict, even in workplaces, kind of stems from not necessarily just two people just don't like each other. Like that might end up being the dynamic. You get two people who just don't necessarily get along, but usually that's started by something happened. There was some sort of event or a situation that might have been caused by, a customer, another coworker, somebody from the outside coming in that created this thing that started the conflict.
External force.
Yeah, so it's real. It's the way that life goes. I don't think there's anything unusual about that. But I do think Deep Space Nine is probably the show of the 90s era Rick Berman produced set of shows that I think made itself most comfortable with the idea of creating conflict with the characters.
Conflict.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think the other thing we've talked about a lot with Deep Space Nine is because the space station is a space station and not a ship moving from place to place.
We can't have those external forces as much.
These things that create the conflict are sitting with you. Like you're orbiting, or you're right next door to a planet that was just occupied by another society, and now another entity like Starfleet has kind of come along to try to hold hands and work through challenges. And the DNA of that show, the foundation of that show, is built on conflict with outsiders, with this big political situation with the Bajorans and the Cardassians and Starfleet, these different cultures and with rich histories of stuff to work through.
Yeah.
But because they have to sit there, that's the other thing that I think the other choice that they made that allowed for more conflict. By having to sit there and not just have to warp away and buy planet, here comes the Cerritos to come pick up the pieces after we leave. It allows for more exploration of, difference and conflict.
Yeah, it's not just wrapped up in a bow week to week. It's something they got to live with because it's relatively stagnant. It kind of changes maybe as the show goes on, but yeah.
Right. But is it one of the things that people used to always beat up Deep Space Nine about? Even Deep Space Nine sort of, I think, has the reputation for being like the golden child now, like the most loved show, and usually you get people being honest, like, what's the best show? Yeah, what's the best written, what's the best built show? It's usually Deep Space Nine, but, growing up and being around when it was kind of new, and even as a young kid, I feel like the constant question that people asked was, is it really Star Trek? Is it too dark? Is it too full of conflict? Does it reflect, like, Roddenberry's vision, which is a conflict? That's always the question. But Deep Space Nine really had that posed to it all the time. Do you find it, like, radically different in a way that makes you question, like, does this feel like the same Star Trek, or does it just feel like a different version of, like, do you feel like that, or does it feel like folded right in with everything else and just have with its own wrinkles?
It doesn't feel folded right in, because if they were all the same, like, that would be just, I would get tired of that. So I think it's important to, if you're building a franchise, to explore, both ends of the spectrum, right? We started with primarily more of a character conflict show. Okay, then we moved to the other side. Well, they probably asked the same thing about TNG. Is this Star Trek? This is there's no conflict with all these. Yeah, and now we're back to that other side. Maybe a little bit further in some episodes and a little bit less, but we're definitely kind of character side. To me, it's all Star Trek still. So.
I agree. I think if Star Trek at the end of the day is all about infinite diversity and infinite combinations and differences working together
and with the show,
and with the shows, and I think even Deep Space Nine, Deep Space Nine is watching Starfleet and the Bajoran militia and a family of Ferengi working together and battling through differences and not always seeing things the same way, but still kind of living together and working through differences and being together.
What they did in TOS?
That is exactly what they did in TOS. I mean, on a bigger scale in Deep Space Nine for sure, and it's an expanded universe to play in a different era for television. But I think it's very much Star Trek. If all the shows were the same and they just did the same sort of thing in a repackaged set of characters on a new ship with some different production design, then I think one of the strengths of Star Trek is that each show has its own voice and way of exploring these different ideas, and I think Deep Space Nine does it beautifully. I think it asks the same questions that TOS asked, and was interested in exploring, and just does it on a grander scale and in a way that 90s TV would allow for. So, what about Voyager, which is your baby? It's your kind of intro show that you love.
It's definitely external, just because I think the premise of the show, they're moving from getting closer and closer back home, but I think it was set up to have some character conflict, especially with the Maquis Starfleet stuff, which you've never really got. I think there are some elements similar to we talked about earlier in the show with the Outsider conflict. I think there's some good stuff with the Doctor. There's some good stuff with 709. There's some conflict there.
With Neelix sometimes.
And Neelix sometimes, but I probably would say external.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. It was definitely set up.
It was.
But they never really capitalized on that. So.
I think they tried to do a lot of the same things Deep Space Nine tried to do by building things into the Bible of the show, the foundation of the show with the Maquis crew. It's so built for that. It's so built for these two sets of differing background. Like not everybody on this little ship is a Starfleet officer. Not everybody went to the academy. Not everybody, got into this for the same reasons. There are people who are outlaws and, flunked out Starfleet cadets and people from all over the galaxy who were freedom fighters and were terrorists, depending on who you're coming at it from. And here they are working on this ship together because they have to. And I think, when I watch Caretaker, one of the things that always pops out to me, and I remember, is wow, they really set this up, but they never did anything with it, was the Chakotay Tom Paris conflict. Those guys hated each other. Tom Paris, there's a sort of old mission that's alluded to where Paris kind of betrayed Chakotay and stabbed him in the back and set up this disastrous thing, and Chakotay doesn't even want to look at him, and they set it up pretty nicely. There's good dialogue between the two of them, and the end of the episode ends with Tom saving Chakotay, and Chakotay telling him that he owes his life to him. So they set these dynamics up, but never really capitalized on them. And I would love to have seen more of that. But you're right. I think as the show got going, most of its inner character conflict came from in the early days, things like the Doctor kind of rubbing against the crew not knowing how to deal with him, and then eventually Seven shows up, and the Borg and the prejudice with that, and her growing up, and becoming more human. That's where a lot of the character conflict within the ship kind of stems from, as opposed to those Starfleet Maquis dynamics. Occasionally in the early days you got a little bit of it in Parallax and Learning Curve, but never anything that really lasted.
But nothing that really touches maybe TOS or
not really
Deep Space Nine.
Right. Yeah. No, you don't get. I think in Deep Space Nine, way more often, you get Kira and Sisko maybe having a different idea on how to deal with something than you do with Janeway and Chakotay. I mean, occasionally Janeway and Chakotay, in episodes like Scorpion and Equinox, they do have different outlooks, and there are moments in episodes that I think they do take advantage of creating a conflict between the captain and the first officer. But it always feels like only when it's a big deal, like when it's a cliffhanger and a big episode.
Or when she's about to send someone out the airlock.
Maybe exactly. Maybe Chakotay, yeah. And it's actually weirdly flipped. Like in Equinox, I feel like the way Janeway deals with the Equinox and Captain Ransom is the more sort of Maquis, vengeful, rogue approach, where Chakotay is kind of more balanced about it and tries to level her off a little bit and check her on her thirst for kind of getting even and making sure that he gets stopped, which I think is an interesting dramatic choice. Not a bad one. I love Equinox, and I love that dynamic between those two characters in those two episodes. But just goes to show that it's not consistently explored, I don't think, in the show. But it was built for it. It definitely was built for it, like you said.
Yeah.
Which is kind of one of the old frustrations people have with Voyager, like the as we've talked about many times, the
missed opportunity.
The missed opportunity.
That is Voyager.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think, similarly to TNG, I do think some of the assets that TNG enjoys, with that comfort food and that nice feeling, pays off in Voyager too when you get into it. I think it's
And which kind of AKA Manuel kind of alludes to. What's interesting about Voyager is the similar dynamics of TNG, which is what you just said. So
yeah,
I definitely agree with that. It's just frustrating because the way they set the table, they set the tone, they set the show up, it kind of lended itself to have that, obviously that external force that's going to create conflict, but also conflict between characters, and I think you get the best of both worlds, pun intended. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, AKA Manuel does raise some interesting things. Look at Picard and Data's relationship and try to match it with Janeway and the Doctor's. And Janeway does.
Very similar.
It's similar, but I think the way Janeway takes longer to kind of embrace the Doctor and accept the Doctor as a full individual allows for a little bit more conflict and a little bit more, of a wrinkle in that in the dynamic of the character conflict of the show. Fitzy Calher wasn't sustained, but we did get some episodes with Maquis Starfleet conflict, right? Yeah, we said that.
Yeah.
Picard and Janeway kind of cut from the same cloth. Both scientists, kind of philosopher with Picard, historian, philosopher, in archaeology kind of interests, and Janeway very much a mathematician and scientist. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, we're both people who love Voyager for all its strengths and faults.
Yes.
And some of the things that I wish it did, I think would have changed the DNA of the show. I think the show would have been very different if it wore that Starfleet Maquis conflict on its sleeve. I don't know if it would have been better or not as good, but I do think I think it would have changed the DNA of what the show was, and I think that the strengths and weaknesses that we see in it now would be different than if it had embraced those ideas more.
Maybe they were trying to create conflict with the viewer.
Yeah, constantly battling what I wish it was and what it is, which I also love. Yeah. Moving into Enterprise, which is a unique animal in that they tried to shed a lot of the TNG, DS9, Voyager tropes, at least on concept, by going back in time, making it a prequel. But was it successful? I mean, anybody who knows me knows I love Enterprise. I really do. I think you do too. You like Enterprise a lot, and you enjoyed it the last time you watched it. So what comes to mind when you think about Enterprise with character conflict?
For Enterprise, I think they kind of try to a little bit. There's some good conflict in there, I think. And I think it's a little bit a throwback to TOS, where we get this logical perspective of the Vulcan people, Paul, and then we get this not logical, kind of maybe emotional, kind of from the hip character that we get with Trip Tucker, and Archer, and then we get somewhere in the middle with Archer.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the thing that Enterprise tried to do is you're right. I think they definitely tried to capture some of that TOS stuff, but I think they tried to also incorporate it into the arc a little bit. Like, one of the things that I like to watch in Enterprise is Archer grow in his sort of, early on. He's very kind of, he doesn't give the Vulcans a whole lot of credit. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't believe what they say a lot of the time. He takes everything they give him with a high degree of skepticism. But that evolves over time, and I think he grows to trust them a little bit more as the show goes on. And then by the end, I think he's much more, well-rounded in his perspectives. But yeah, I think he does evolve into, somebody who can create that balancing dynamic between the humanity and the logic. But you certainly do get similar scenes and situations with Trip and T'Pol, especially in those early seasons, kind of just having two different outlooks. There are lots of scenes in Archer's ready room, or in the back of the bridge with just the three of them, and in the mess, where the three of them are kind of talking about the mission, setting it up or wrapping it up, and talking about the different ways of viewing it. And that's a very conscious choice, I think, to get back to some of that TOS stuff. But I don't think they tried to completely mimic it. I think they tried to incorporate some longer running arcs and character development, things that TOS couldn't do in the 60s.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was some conflict between either side. Maybe it was a two-sided conflict where it was T'Pol versus the rest of the crew,
right,
or rest of Starfleet. So, yeah.
But again, is that yet another example of it kind of being a lot of the character conflict comes from the outsider? It's coming from T'Pol and the Vulcans. You don't get a ton of human to human conflict. A little bit in an episode like Shuttlepod 1, Trip and Malcolm kind of
are
at odds a little bit,
and
sort of,
and O'Brien 2.0 a little bit.
I think they kind of touch on some of those similar themes. I think them kind of facing death together in that shuttle pod is kind of a thing that could credibly create a bond and an understanding going through something like that. But they try. I think there's an effort made to maybe do a little bit of it, but it feels familiar, and I think that's one of the things that Enterprise kind of gets beat up for. Even in trying to go back in time and do the prequel thing and harken back to TOS, I think just because Star Trek was so such a well-oiled machine, the way it was produced and written and done, that it kind of couldn't help but carry some of the same DNA and traits that the other shows had, and the way that it handled that character conflict felt familiar, I think, for a lot of people, and for me too, with the way that the characters interacted, and they kind of fell into the same habits with the way that they wrote the characters, for better or worse. But of course, Enterprise is unique in that it kind of got cut a little short compared to some of those other shows, TNG, DS9, Voyager.
TOS did as well.
TOS did, didn't have the longer running timeline. Who knows what Enterprise would have looked like if it had those extra few years on the back end to further explore some of those dynamics. But yeah, and then I guess maybe because these new shows are all kind of still running and still in progress, let's just maybe look at new Trek as a whole. Discovery, Picard, this is a whole new iteration. This is as different, I think, as like the way I kind of view it is Star Trek kind of comes in these three generations. You have TOS, which is its own thing. It was, like we said at the beginning when we were talking about TOS, it's created as just a standalone science fiction adventure show in the 60s, not thinking about this big universe. And then you have the 90s era with Rick Berman kind of running it, with kind of building the timeline and establishing it as a franchise, and then it takes a break and comes back, and now we're kind of in our
90s.
Third. Yeah, and I think this is as different.
Call it.
The third generation, the post, whatever you want to call it, new era. It's as different from the 90s era stuff as the 90s era stuff was different from TOS. That's the way I kind of look at it. It's the next step.
I think we get to see the progression.
Yeah, and what kind of comes to mind for you when you think of this? Like, do you see it differently? Do you see it? Like, do you see the difference in the way that these new shows are handling their characters compared to the way those TNG through Enterprise shows did?
Yeah.
Anything come to mind?
I think just what comes to mind primarily to me is how the show is really set up. Is really completely different kind of than most shows. I think we take a more microscopic look, or there's not really the ensemble-y type anymore. It's really kind of, for lack of a better term, just character focused, I think. But also there is clearly some external conflicts that go and can arise. So but I mean, we see the progression too, right? We see, I would say maybe 09, there is a greater character conflict than there is in Beyond. Beyond, we kind of get that arrived type of where the crew just works like a well-oiled machine. It's the conflict primarily comes from an external source. So we do see some change throughout the iterations of the shows and, I guess, movies. So
with Kelvin Timeline, for sure, I do think that 09, they really embrace putting the characters into conflict. Not the characters don't all get along. It's not a smooth transition into becoming a crew, and even into Darkness, I think it's still a work in progress. The way that these characters interact with each other, and then in Beyond, it feels more like arrived. Like, this is them into their mission. They feel more familiar as among each other, and as well to us. Like, I think they feel more familiar as, like, this is what we kind of know Star Trek crews to be like. And then with the new shows like Discovery and Picard, I do think the way the casts are built is a little different. I think Discovery is very much a show that was conceived and has been delivered as a show kind of about Michael Burnham's journey and emotional trials and tribulations, growing as this child of a conflicted background and upbringing, and and then the other characters kind of all stem from her, and more so than the other shows where it's more of an ensemble. I think I think they're just constructed differently, but I do think these newer shows are less reticent to create situations where the characters are simply in conflict. I think Picard thinking about Picard. These are not Starfleet officers. These are all people who are kind of out of it. So that creates an obvious, easy path toward having these characters not necessarily like each other, not necessarily trust each other. And even in Discovery, I think the way that show was kind of built from the beginning with, seeing it through the eyes of Burnham, who's mutineer coming to the Discovery, and people are kind of skeptical of her. And you got Lorca at the top of the food chain, who's got his own agenda. That just allowed for things to just seep off of that beginning point of mistrust. Stamets at the beginning is not happy about the way his work is being used, and his it's kind of all baked into the cake, these character conflicts. But I do think it's kind of grown into a more familiar, at least right now we're recording this at November 1st, 2020, so season 3 of Discovery is like the latest thing we've seen. And I think it's kind of becoming more of a traditional, familiar Star Trek crew on that show, while still being constructed differently than what we're used to from the other shows with more big ensemble.
Which I think is kind of the ultimate goal to get to, because if you think about Picard too, they're kind of feeling like a crew esque
by the end of it.
At the end of that show.
Yeah, Fitzgerald likes to explore the contrast between the crews of the Shenzhou and Discovery. That's actually, if you go back and you watch those first couple episodes, the Shenzhou stuff is like the end of that show. You're watching like the end of a show that you never saw. Like you're kind of jumping in at the end of that journey with Georgiou and Burnham and Saru. You can kind of imagine 7 years predating that with those three characters kind of headlining a series, and it being a much more traditional, these guys are just kind of out exploring space, doing their thing, and it ends with this disaster with the Klingons. And then Discovery is more of a ragtag group of, people thrown in together in the middle of a war, and not everybody's happy to be there. And it's a definite different, a nice contrast for sure. AKA Mamel says Burnham reminds her of Seven of Nine a bit, with the kind of conflicted background and
definitely
being kind of brought up, as kind of a lost child, a wild child, sort of,
and kind of becomes the outsider because of what happens to that character. So, I get that.
Yeah. But the big thing with those shows in this era of Trek is that it's ongoing, where we're looking at TOS and TNG through Enterprise as kind of completed
final
iterations of Star Trek. Those things have a beginning, middle, and an end to those journeys, and the way that those shows did this. So it's easy to kind of look at them as sort of completed entities and look at those strengths and weaknesses as final, where this is still in progress. So it's
ongoing.
It's a much tougher thing to kind of digest. But any other thoughts on character conflict in Star Trek? Any?
No, I don't think so.
Which show do you think does it the best? Which show do you think found the best way of handling it, or your favorite way of handling it?
I hate that word. I hate best. I do enjoy favorite a little bit more. Favorite, I like TOS. That's probably my favorite. Best, probably, obviously, Deep Space Nine. I think they do a good job of having character conflict, but also doing some cool stuff with the external conflict, which could be This show is just about conflict in general, I think. So I think,
yeah.
What about you?
DS9 probably. I think it's fair to take the position that it had the most interesting approach to it. By building it up and paying off its promises from the beginning, with creating a situation that allowed for the characters to have conflict amongst themselves, like our main people, and then also having this subset of characters as well, the recurring batch, who all bring their own other different perspectives. You have characters like Garrick Come and Go, who's kind of an anomaly and has his own set of loyalties and confusing agendas. And then you have the Dominion and all that stuff that kind of comes in later. So it's kind of layered and layered and layered, opportunities for conflict that are more traditional outside coming in. They find ways to do it the old-fashioned way, but they also have these baked-in ideas with the characters on the most ground level to allow for some interesting rubs between them. But TOS is probably my favorite because it's so simple, and I think it's so easy to boil down. This is what this show is at its core, because it's simple and it's its own thing.
DNA of that show.
Yeah, and I like watching it through that lens as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Conflict. Don't want to get political, but in the coming week, maybe weeks, there could be some external conflicts going on. I don't know. Just remember to, I don't know.
Watch Star Trek and use it as a guide to dealing with these difficult things.
That's the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's gonna. I think if you live in the United States, we're in for a challenging week, I would say, and Star Trek's a good guiding principle, I think, for watching people deal with these things. Yeah.
There was a fun little kind of adage or strategy. If you had a good day, celebrate by watching Star Trek. If you had a bad day, take shelter and comfort in watching Star Trek. So.
Yeah, that's right. It works either way. For sure. To answer that question, AK Mamel said DS9 for sure for them, and then Fitzcalherb, DS9 and TOS for them as well. Love the diversity and conflict across the series. I agree with that. I love that all the shows are different, but there's also one of the happy accidents of it is I think they all have their own unique traits and personalities and ways of handling it, but there are enough common threads through them that keep them as one thing and easily linked together. So I agree with you, Fitzcalherb, completely. I think that'll do it for this week's episode of Trek Live, other than maybe if you want to shout anything out. Do you have any content, any podcasts, anything you... No pressure.
No pressure. I definitely have a backlog of things to do, or listen to.
Sure.
I think there was a new Trek Ranks with Cardassian.
Yep.
Top 5 Cardassian episodes. I'm hesitant to listen to that one just because...
So much of it is coming.
So much of it is probably coming from Deep Space Nine that I might maybe push that until I finish. But future content, definitely stay tuned for core setting next week. One of us or both of us will be there. And then Trek Live next weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. We got more coming. We'll be back for Course Heading, live streaming over on the Course Heading Twitter page on Saturday at 10 a.m. It'll either be both of us or one of us talking about the latest episode in Discovery, usually for about this last couple because it's been Discovery and it's hot and heavy and lots to talk about. It's been a little longer, but we try to keep that closer to like a half hour, 40 minutes. And then Trek Live, of course, on Sundays at 10 a.m., which is usually around the hour. A little over today because it was a thick topic and a lot to talk about. And a lot of rewatch stuff to talk about too. Because I watched a lot. So Sunday 10 a.m. Trek Live streaming right here on Twitter and Periscope on the Trek Fan 4387 feed, and then also on YouTube on Tuesday at 6:00 p.m. You'll find it, the recording on the Trek Live YouTube page. Discord, real quick, I'll throw that out there. If you're interested in joining the Trek Live Discord channel, Discord server, you can DM me at TrekFan4387. It's a lively bunch. It's modest and not over the top and huge to the point where it's intimidating. It's not going to blow up your phone, but it's a nice community of Star Trek fans who are positive and accepting of each other, talking about episodes we're watching, books we're reading, reactions to the latest Star Trek stuff, off-topic channel where we can just chat about whatever's going on, different shows we're watching. If you want to network with, just like-minded Star Trek fans, if you're just looking to meet people, send me a DM, TrekFan4387, and I'll get you in. And welcome you on board.
Yeah, it's got a little something for everyone, I think, and that's what's really nice. Kind of the evolution of that Discord server. So if you're interested in becoming a Trek Live crew member on there, definitely DM Bill. He'll get you set up.
For sure.
Yep.
Great. Okay, I thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.